Close out this week of Locked On Texans podcast. We look at, could the Houston Texans make a mistake? That mistake will be not extending Nico Collins now. And Cody and I dive into the YouTube comments.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers, to this Friday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your Texans football analyst, John Sports Guy Hickman. On the other side of the screen, Texas Credential Media member, Sports Illustrated's own Cody Davis. And to all of our first-time listeners and viewers, thank you for stopping by. We really appreciate it. Do us a favor, just 3 of them. Subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, for our returning listeners, thank you for coming back as Cody and I continue to talk Texans here on the show. It's Friday. We are going into the weekend. Cody and I just joked about how, my goodness, it's still May. May has been a long month. We are really getting ready and we're prepared and we're excited for July, which is a whole nother month away, but hopefully 2 months away, actually. But hopefully, once we get to June, we'll be able to speed through June just a little bit. Not Father's Day. Definitely take our time that day. But
this would be your first time, right? Like your first official time, huh?
And listen, if you guys want to send me anything or show me any love, feel free to do that. Let the Lord guide your spirit. But Cody, guide the show today as we open up talking about Nico. Take it away.
Yeah, so on today's show, we're going to really dive into the YouTube comments because with OTAs, man, there's been a lot of fun comments in the YouTube section. So we definitely going to talk about that, highlight some of the best and have fun with you guys today. But, John, speaking of OTAs, I really want us to revisit a conversation you and I had right after the Texans acquired Stephon Diggs and they restructured his contract. Everybody already know the story. They voided the last 3 years of his deal. So he is also in his final year of his contract as well. You and I had a conversation on whether or not the Texans will have a dilemma on their hands this time next season in terms of will they be willing to extend and pay both guys and have roughly around $45 to $50 million tied up into 2 wide receivers, especially considering that whoever you extend starting this year, that money is going to translate over into when you have to extend Derek Stingley, CJ Stroud, Will Anderson Jr., Tank Dell, depending on the length of the contract. But John, I'm standing there on Tuesday, and one thing about OTAs, man, and I gave this disclaimer. One thing about OTAs, you can fall victim to a guy that you really don't know too much about, looks extremely good, or a guy that you have high expectations for and he doesn't look that good. OTAs can give you some sense of a false evaluation. However, I still left NRG Stadium on Tuesday thinking to myself, disclaimer, Stephon Diggs wasn't there, but I left NRG Stadium on Tuesday thinking to myself, hey, Nico Collins is still the best wide receiver that the Houston Texans have. And it seemed like he was already in mid-season form. And, John, as I look back over my notes and looked at how much Nico Collins stood out, and once again, it's fair to talk about how good he looks because we've seen it, especially coming off his first 1,000-yard season. But as I stood there, I'm looking back at my notes and I'm looking at the excitement and I'm expecting big things. We all expecting big things from Nico Collins. I'm really starting to think whether or not the Houston Texans are making a mistake by not extending Nico Collins now. Before we dive into that, I do want to say we have not had an opportunity to talk to Nico about his contract. I'm pretty sure that'll be coming up in the next couple of weeks, probably more so during mandatory camp at the start of June. I'm pretty sure around that time we'll have another opportunity to talk to Nick Caserio, and around that time, especially when we get closer to training camp, that is going to be a topic for conversation. So as of right now, I do want to point out that neither one of those guys have talked about whether or not they have had these talks about contract extension. But John, as of right now, man, Nico Collins, his market projection is $23 million for the next 4 years. And I always go back to, it might have been their best decision to do it in the middle of last season.
Yeah.
However,
we've seen Nick do that a lot.
We see Nick do that a lot. However, and this goes back to the reason why it's important to point out that we haven't talked to Nico Collins. I'm wondering if, and I haven't heard anything, by the way, but I'm wondering if him and his agents are betting on themselves. Because if they are, that was smart on their behalf. Because if he goes out and still take the helm as wide receiver 1, or him and Stephon Diggs be the first Texans wide receiver duo to both reach over 1,000, then you're looking at a situation where they're going to be forced to pay Nico Collins top tier money. And you already know what that money is looking like around the league as of right now.
Yeah, and I think Houston could find themselves in the Philadelphia Eagles situation where you got two guys at that position, at the wide receiver position, taking up about $50 million of your salary cap. When we look at A.J. Brown, he's at, I believe, if he's not at 30, he's a little bit over or right under it, between 29 and 31. Same for Devontae Smith. And you also look at Houston right now. You said the market value for Nico Collins is $23 million. The franchise tag, I believe, so the market value overall for the wide receiver position is, I think, 21.8. You look at next year's class of guys that are going to get paid. The guy that sticks out above everybody, and I mean above everybody, it's Justin Jefferson. So you got Jamar Chase, who will be getting paid. I think for Houston, I would not be shocked if we saw Houston wait till middle of the season. And again, I think Nick has a plan. I really do. I think that plan is centered around the basis of waiting and seeing, not just necessarily for Nico, but also for Stephon Diggs. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw Houston get both of those guys extended, right? They may take up nearly $50 million of your salary cap, but then you look at how they went about the Danielle Hunter contract. We're going to extend one of those guys to an impactful, huge deal for 2 years. After that 2 years is up, then we'll start looking at some of our in-home guys. Nico is one of that, so maybe he doesn't get the 2-year contract. Maybe he gets a 3-year contract. Maybe Stephon gets a 2-year contract. But around that period of time, right after it, they got to take care of guys like Stingley. They got to take care of guys depending on where he's at in his career. Christian Harris, some of those 2022 draft classmates, they're going to get paid. But I do think Houston needs to make sure that they are not waiting until the end of the season. They cannot go into next offseason trying to sign Nico. I don't think so, because now you're looking at a situation where that 23 can potentially go up, and then it becomes Nick Caserio says it all the time, a value game. How much do we value you and that player in that position? Nico deserves it to an extent. I think for Nico and for Houston, it's important for him to replicate his success from last year. Now, given that Stephon Diggs is on this team, am I looking for another record year from him? Not necessarily, but I am looking for a 1,000-yard receiving season. I am looking for 6 to 8 TDs. I am looking for 15 to 17 yards per catch. I am looking for some of those same things that he, did well last year with the quarterback of C.J. Stroud's stature, C.J. Stroud, of course, and just build off of that, where we're looking at Nico Collins and we're saying to ourselves, you're the first receiver to do X, Y, and Z for Houston since Brandon Cook's first couple of seasons. And I think that will be back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons for a receiver for the Houston Texans. And so 23, I think, is very fair for Nico. If he goes out there, let's say by week 8, week 9, He's sitting at 800, 700, 800 yards, which is doable because that's kind of where he was last year, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think it's a situation you can go into next offseason and you got guys like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb. My goodness. Like,
and as of right now, we're wondering why the Bengals and Cowboys haven't extended CD and Chase as of right now. But John, I like the point.
I'm sorry, I do want to say this. Devontae Smith and AJ Brown, they make up $57 million from the salary cap for 2024 this year. Tyreek Hill is at 3 with 30. Amon-Ra St. Brown is at 30.003. Tyreek Hill is at 30. Devontae Adams is at 28. I think it starts to get down to, do we value Nico Collins like the Indianapolis Colts value Michael Pittman, who's at 23. Terry McLaurin for the Commanders, Scary Terry, he's at 23. DK Metcalf is at 24. Or if we wait, does he start to creep around at Devontae Adams, 28, Tyreek Hill, 30? That's a dilemma because if he goes out there and be productive one more time like he was last year, if Houston won't pay it, somebody going to pay it. There's a team up north that could definitely use boosts at receivers. Trust me about it. So somebody has the salary cap to pay him around that money. Once you get around that Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, that's when I think for Houston, it's kind of like, we don't want to pay that much.
I could definitely see, because the one thing that I've been thinking about and pondering over the last couple of weeks was how in the world are they going to pay both of these guys max money? Because that's the reality of the situation that we're looking at here. And John, you made a very good point that I never thought about it until now. When you say you can definitely see them paying one of these wide receivers, more so Stephon Diggs without a shadow of a doubt, the 2-year about $45-50 million that we saw out of Danielle Hunter, especially considering that Stephon Diggs is getting up there in age. Yes, he's the better receiver as of right now. The more experienced receiver has always been top 5, top 10 in this league at the position. However, he is getting up there in age, and I could definitely see the Houston Texans trying to, make sure they keep that championship window that they now have opened with him as much as possible. That would be great, which brings me back to I would much prefer them to get a long-term deal with Nico Collins. And this conversation reminds me of what we used to talk about this time last year when we was looking at Jonathan Gennard. And the one thing about Jonathan Gennard that we kept saying all throughout the season, I was on board with extending him and keeping him around. The one knock was we only saw him do this type of production and stay healthy for one season. In Nico Collins' case, I think he's in a better situation because he's going to have that extra season. And if he, just like Jonathan Gennard, we had questions, if he could continue to improve his on-field production, continue to stay healthy and be a playmaker and all that other good stuff, I could definitely see the Houston Texans keeping Nico around, especially if number 7 loves him.
I'll tell you what, though, Nico ain't the only person that's going to be getting some money soon. Houston Texans, if y'all didn't buy y'all tickets, y'all didn't enjoy them cheap tickets last year, I don't know how y'all going to enjoy it this year, but I believe that the Houston Texans stadium, the NRGs, will still be packed out. But the Houston Texans saw an increase almost of 100% in average ticket prices between last year and this upcoming year. The Texans ticket price jumped from an average of $155 in 2023 to $309. And you know what, Cody? I have a suspicion that ain't gonna matter. How many times last year? See, this shot come out and said, "Hey, we need to perform for our people so they can come back and trust us to come to the NRG Stadium." And the last 2 home games, we saw it packed out and jumping. So for Houston, y'all got a good problem on y'all hands.
Yeah,
because it's the first time in a long time we see this stadium packed out. They better have a lot of Trill Burgers on hand.
It's packed out, but please, y'all, and I'm giving y'all this message on May 24, 2024. Get to the stadium on time, especially with these national games that we have. Don't let the kickoff start and they panned it in the crowd. Ain't nobody here in Houston. They do this in NRG, Toyota, Minute Maid, BBVA, the Fertitta Center. Like, get to the games on time.
No,
Now I be getting mad. I be getting mad. National media. Ain't nobody support these Houston teams. They do. Pan to the crowd in the second half. They be there. They be there. Be on time.
First half, they full of beer. They full
Christmas
of
Day be on time. Y'all better be on time. Don't embarrass us in front of company now.
Well, that's a 3:30 game, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the Christmas game, they'll get out there early enough to by the time it's 3:30, they drinks are already settled in. They good, they lit, they going in there and they going in there ready for war, boy. But it's good for Houston to kind of get back a little bit on top because I enjoyed them cheap tickets. If I wasn't at the game in the box, I had a couple of games where I was like, you know what, they got tickets right now for $37. I'm getting a couple of these tickets. I can't afford it no more. So Houston, y'all better bring some playoff wins because $309 for the average ticket is nice. But that's what happens when you get star-studded talent like CJ, Will, Janelle, Stephon, Nico, Tank. They got the players. They just got to produce at them ticket prices. Passion, drive, and patience is the winning formula for winning championships. But it's also the winning formula to keep your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, style, or all three, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts. For your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guarantee Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it'll be easy to make your car the MVP of the road and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. So now we're diving into the YouTube comments. Houston Texans takeaways from OTAs, how Jalen Petrie and Dameon Pierce could bounce back. I'm not going to necessarily talk about them right now, but I thought this was an interesting comment, and I thought this is something that we could talk about. Can't wait for next season to start. This is from Lone Star Wrangler 8407. Can't wait for next season to start. Barbecue, cold beers, and Texans. They got me thinking. What is your go-to season kickoff meal? What's your go-to? Everybody has something that they do when the season kicks off, whether it's for Thursday night football, the very first game of the season. I know a lot of people get hyped about preseason, so you can check out the rookies and some of the guys that you're rooting for. We got a few of those guys here in Houston. I think for me, I'm very simple. I need some wings. I need some wings, and I'm going to take it a step further because at the beginning of the season, I can go give me some flavored wings, some sauce and toss wings. But for the playoff games, because playoffs for me, it's only a handful of games going on, and I have an opportunity to watch all of them. And for a while, I didn't have to worry about the Texans in the playoffs up until last year. So I really had a day. I go give me some Timmy Chans with some barbecue rice, wing dinner, 6-piece. I come back home, I sit down at the tape, and I go to town. I give me a couple of beers, and I'm ready to watch football. But on that same podcast, when we talked about Dameon Pierce and Jalen Petrie, Jalen Johnson, 0339. For Pierce, he just needs to be a capable RB2. If you can get 500 to 700 yards and get at least 5 yards a carry, that should be good enough for RB2 position. The RB2 spot is his position to lose, and if he doesn't show out, Jawar Jordan is going to take his spot. Same with Petrie. If he can't play at a high level, Bullock is going to take his spot. Going to be interesting to see how these guys are going to bounce back. I 100% agree with you, Jaden, about Dameon Pierce. Maybe 700 yards could be a lot because, Joe Mixon has been a workhorse type of running back since entering the NFL. He's always been lined up on the field a lot. But I think for Pierce, it does come down to you cannot, and I said it before, you cannot average 2.7, 3.7 yards per carry. Once you're on the field, you got to be able to give Houston at least 4 yards per pop. You got to be a player that they look to say, okay, we can really trust you to take some pressure off of Joe Mixon.
John, I think you put it best yesterday when we was talking about this conversation. Maybe we can see the Texans lightening Joe Mixon's role because yes, he's been a productive running back throughout his whole entire career.
30.
But I think I was about to say he's 30 years old, and I think this is going to be year 6 or 7 for him. So you could look at this from a situation. Maybe there's something we could dive into next week is looking at the roster construction. It seemed like for right now, remember in the first segment, we were sitting here talking about Stephon Diggs. We know the load that Stephon Diggs had to carry in Minnesota. We know the load that Stephon Diggs had to carry in Buffalo. He's not going to be able to have that. I'm not going to say he's not going to be able to. He's definitely not going to have to worry about carrying that much responsibility here in the city of Houston. Why? Because this might be arguably, if not the best wide receiving core that he's been a part of. You got Nico Collins who could go out there and give you damn near 200 yards. I mean, we've seen it. You got Tank Dell who is shifting, who could be a playmaker and all this other stuff. You have 2 guys to where, look, I know we haven't seen it yet, but give or take, we would not be surprised if we look up and have one of these games where John, what's his name? John Mechie, 3-2-1. We look up and they have one of those games where John Mechie pop off for 70 to 80 yards. Same thing with Xavier Hutchinson if they get the opportunity. It's like that in the running back field, in the offensive backfield as well. I think they don't want Joe Mixon to have that same burden and responsibility that he had in Cincinnati. And if that's the case, that means Dameon Pierce did a damn good job in taking care of his body, taking care of the mental aspect, and definitely revitalizing his career.
On that same pod, and I think this is interesting to leave out on before we do more YouTube comments. Thank you, John Petrie, and this is from BW72581. Thank you, John. Petrie is most successful in the box. That's one of the comments. Also, from Darrell Barlow, 1044. Lovie Smith had a simple defense, which to me allowed Petrie to play fast without thinking. I don't have much to say to that comment other than I definitely like their point of view. I do think, and especially as a rookie, a lot of rookies, when you come in, you try to keep things simple for them and try to do things that they're accustomed to doing coming out of college, which why I wanted to tie in both of those comments, playing around the box, being fast, being aggressive. Although he missed a lot of tackles, you saw him being put in positions to where the ball is in the air, you can go get it. 5 interceptions. We need you to go get a tackle for loss. He was able to do that for Houston. And I wonder if that will be an approach. Don't know. Can't say so. Can't speak to it. But if that will be an approach for Jalen Petrie again, because I talked about minimizing his role this year. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Before we close out today's show, more YouTube comments. Cody, this one I think is for you. Leo G. Jr., 2012. Who is the loudest coach on the Texans?
Frank Ross, special team coordinator. Frank Ross by far. He's just a very interesting guy to cover because he has so much hype, so much love for the game, man. And to be honest with you, we really do not hear a coach scream that much until the Texans go into their special team drills and stuff. He is by far the loudest. And that might sound shocking. I know a lot of people, even if you read that comment, hear the comment, you might think is D'Amico Ryans. To be honest with you, D'Amico really doesn't scream and talk that much at practice, at least from what we see. Now, I've heard stories how the way he be cutting up inside that locker room, but on the field during practice, there's been times to understand how mellow D'Amico Ryans is on the field at practice, and I know that's shocking to say because you see him on TV with all the jumping and running down the field sidelines with the officials. There's been moments where we be standing on the sideline at practice and be like, "Has anybody seen D'Amico? Like he's that
He's
mellow."
in coaching mode a lot on the practice field.
But I also wonder how much of that is teaching mode, because when you're teaching, that is different from everybody get down on the 50, that kind of stuff. Like when you're teaching, I'm wondering if maybe I could talk to some players about this. I'm wondering if that's why he's so mellow and stuff in practice, because he really wants everybody to get to the technical side of things. But by far, man, Frank Ross, the loudest coach that the Texans have.
Jarrell Scott 5203 again. I already told y'all about Okuda. They need to sign the cornerback, Steven Nelson, Stephon Gilmore, or Xavier Howard. It will be a long season if we don't upgrade. I don't think Steven Nelson's gonna come back.
No,
I don't think a lot of y'all saw Stephon Gilmore last year. I think you're still attaching the name to the talent. No disrespect to Gilly. I love Gilly as a player, but I do believe that I would rather see what Jeff Okuda has. If we are expecting Houston to play a lot more man, and maybe cover 3 like Houston plays, once receivers get vertical, I don't know how much Stephon Gilmore has left in the tank. Xavier Howard, that's a name that John Crumpler brought up to me the other day. I think we won't see a Houston make a move again. They have, I think, about $22 million in salary cap. I don't think we'll see Houston make a move until preseason or cut down day. Once we get the training camp, the end of July, beginning of August, cut down day, we'll see Houston making some upgrades to this roster. I think safety and cornerback will be something that we'll look to see Houston do. All right. Last comment. Frankie Knuckles 3. Thankful. Very thankful. Thankful, very thankful. Cody, Tank Dell being back and being back playing as fast and as good as he's looked. Really, I'm going to say something. Every couple of seasons, we have a team that is comparable to the greatest show on turf. And the St. Louis Rams from back in the day were Marshall Faulk, Kurt Warner, Ozzie Bruce. Shout out to Ozzie Bruce, one of the most underrated wide receivers in NFL history. Torrey Holt. Every year, a couple of years, we have a quarterback and a wide receiver tandem, and it's like, wow, they could be this version of the greatest show on turf. Tank Dell, Isaac Bruce, Nico Collins, Torrey Holt, Stephon Diggs. It's just Stephon Diggs, right? But Joe Mixon could be a version. He's not as good as Marshall Faulk.
I say, be careful now.
I'm not going to say that. But, Joe Mixon, CJ, Kurt Warner. Could Tank Dell unlock this version of the greatest show on turf for Houston? Because he is special, man.
Man, to be honest with you, John, and yes, this is premature.
We're just talking. But
I hate these conversations, especially now. This is something hopefully we can revisit in the next 4 to 5 years. But the way everything is shaping up, John, I would not be surprised if in the next 5 to 6 years we are talking about the next greatest NFL franchise. You say greatest show on turf. In no way in the world I'm saying that they're going to be just as good or if not better than these, I don't want to use the term dynasties, but I mean, if we keep it real, this is what they are. Not so much greatest show on turf, because I think they only had one Super Bowl win, correct?
Yes.
Was it one? Okay,
yes.
So I mean, it wasn't really a dynasty, but they were still an all-time great
on turf.
But I look at it from a standpoint, in the 80s you had San Fran with Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, those guys. You In the 90s, of course, you had the Dallas Cowboys. Even though I can't stand them, man, you got to respect what they did in the 90s. Then the late 90s, early 2000s, in that small period, you had St. Louis. But then, of course, damn, in the last 2 decades, you had the Patriots. Now we're in the middle of Kansas City, John. The way I look at the Texans right now, and once again, it's way too early, way too premature to say this. But just looking at how everything is in line, from the quarterback, the talent on both sides of the ball, the coaching, the coordinators, the ownership, I would not be surprised if we get to, let's say, the mid 2020s, I want to say, and the Texans have engraved themselves as the next great franchise in this league, because everything is starting to line up. And if you go back and you take a look at where all of those franchises was at that time in their career, at that time that they in their respective league, because we know this league revolves and changes every 5 years or so, they were all on the cusp of greatness, just like what we're seeing out here with the Houston Texans. A young quarterback where it's like, man, if you build around him, he could be the next great whatever. Weapons where it's like, man, you had these guys, the defense that's top 5, top 3, or whatever the case might be. A coach that has the potential to be a quote unquote all-time great. That is why when we start talking about how great this team can be now and in 2025 and 2026 and all this other good stuff, that is why I always say this. And John, you've heard me say this before. It's starting to get scary good for this organization. Now, of course, health, it got to stay healthy. Everybody got to continue to hold their weight. And of course, luck is going to go at this at the same time. But if everything work out for this organization, man, the next 5 years or so,
it's gonna
be special. It's gonna be special, man.
2001, Kurt Warner. This is what the Rams offense looked like. Kurt Warner, 4,800 yards, 36 touchdowns. Marshall Faulk, 1,300 yards on the ground, 12 TDs, 83 catches, 765 yards, 9 TDs. Isaac Bruce, 1,100 yards, 6 TDs. Torrey Holt, 1,300 yards, 7 TDs. That was a 2001 St. Louis Rams. Just, looking at what they could be, what they're going to be compared to the Texans. Kurt Warner in 2000, 34, 21, had a lot of interceptions, 18 interceptions, 1,300 yards for Marshall Faulk. Torrey Holt and Isaac Bruce combined for 3,000 yards, 15 TDs. If you get scared for Houston, enjoy y'all weekend, Texans fans. Please subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, that's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.
Happy Memorial Day.